The text from my ex was still glowing on my phone when I realized how quickly things were about to spiral. I'm moving back to the city and need somewhere to stay. Can I stay with you for a couple of weeks? My reply had been simple, clear, and final. That's not going to happen. So when I opened my front door 2 days later and saw her standing on the porch with 2 heavy suitcases and that same confident half smile, I knew something was wrong. "Relax," she said, brushing past me like she still lived there. "Your sister gave me a key." For a second I just stood there, listening to the wheels of her suitcase scrape across my hallway floor. My own house suddenly felt unfamiliar, like someone had quietly rewritten the rules while I wasn't looking. She dropped her bags in the living room and sighed dramatically. "It's just for a couple weeks." My chest tightened, not from anger, but from the quiet realization of what had just happened. I hadn't just been ignored. I had been bypassed. And the worst part? My sister had helped her do it. That was the moment I understood something very clearly. If they thought they could walk into my life without permission, then they had no idea how quietly I could close the door behind them. I had always been the quiet one, the steady presence everyone assumed would never fight back. Growing up, my opinions were footnotes in family conversations. My choices second-guessed or shrugged off. My sister, always louder, always more charming, had a way of bending the world toward her will. People listened when she spoke. I learned to speak in silence. My ex, on the other hand, had thrived on unpredictability and entitlement. She was magnetic in chaos, the kind of person who could convince you she belonged somewhere simply by smiling. I had fallen once thinking patience and loyalty mattered. I learned otherwise. Even my friendships mirrored the same pattern. My efforts unnoticed, my kindness taken for granted, my boundaries tested as if they were suggestions. I didn't crave drama, but I understood it intimately. The way a chess player reads 3 moves ahead while everyone else is reacting. I wasn't naive. I was underestimated, ignored, brushed aside, and in that underestimation lay power. Because if people thought silence meant weakness, they hadn't watched me plan quietly, wait patiently, and finally, strike without warning. This was not the first betrayal I'd faced. It would not be the last, and it would not go unanswered. She didn't knock, not once. She just let herself in, dragging her bags across the polished floor with a deliberate scrape, as if claiming territory. I watched from the kitchen doorway, silent, letting the moment stretch. Her eyes flicked to me, casual, almost mocking, like I was the intruder in my own home. "Hope you don't mind," she said, tossing her jacket over the sofa. The words were light, airy, but there was weight in the implication. She expected me to move around her, accommodate her, surrender. My sister's betrayal lingered too, her voice in the background, suggesting this was no problem, like I was overreacting. The subtlety of it stung more than anger ever could. A glass left on the counter with fingerprints in my clean kitchen. Shoes kicked off carelessly in the hallway. My favorite chair occupied without permission. Each tiny act was deliberate, calculated. A reminder that they thought they could rewrite boundaries without consequence. I said nothing. I simply watched, noting every glance she gave me, every pause as she unpacked, every self-satisfied sigh. Each small disrespect was a thread in a web she didn't know. I had already started weaving. They believed I was silent, weak, passive. I let them believe it, for now. I found myself in the living room one evening, watching her flick through my record collection like she owned it. The sunlight caught the edge of her phone as she scrolled, the way she laughed softly at some private joke, and something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger that hit me first, it was clarity. Every small betrayal, every disrespectful glance, every quiet dismissal. It had built a pattern I could no longer ignore. This wasn't just about her or my sister, or even the audacity of someone walking into my life uninvited. It was about respect, my respect. I walked to the hall closet and felt the cold metal of a new lock in my hand. The click of the deadbolt when I replaced it sounded louder than any argument I could have made. She would have to leave. And my sister? She would learn quietly that alliances built on convenience came at a cost. I didn't shout. I didn't make a scene. I simply moved with calm precision, each action deliberate, measured. In that moment, I realized the power of quiet resolve. I could reclaim my space, my boundaries, and my dignity without raising my voice. And the satisfaction of that control, that was more potent than any confrontation could ever be. I spent the next 2 days planning in silence. There would be no confrontation, no angry texts, no impulsive actions that could backfire. Every move had to be precise, measured, unavoidable. First, I documented everything: dates, messages, her arrival, the way my sister had handed over the key, photos of bags in my living room, timestamps of messages, even small details like footprints on my freshly cleaned floor. If this ever escalated legally or socially, I would have proof that the intrusion was deliberate, not a misunderstanding. Next, I secured the perimeter. The locks were replaced, spare keys accounted for, and a discreet camera positioned in the hallway. Nothing invasive, just enough to record unauthorized entry. I double-checked access points, alarms and notifications, treating it like a professional security operation. Finally, I structured communication. I drafted a calm message to my sister, citing respect, boundaries, and the seriousness of her choice to give someone else access to my home. There was no accusation, just unambiguous terms. It was all silent, almost invisible. No shouting, no spectacle. The genius of revenge lies in patience. I didn't need to humiliate them publicly. I only needed to ensure that when the consequences arrived, they couldn't claim ignorance, and I was meticulous enough to make sure they wouldn't. She arrived that evening, suitcase in hand, expecting the usual ease. The door wouldn't budge. She knocked once, lightly, and I didn't answer. Then twice, more insistently, her tone edging toward frustration. I stayed in the shadows, watching her through the peephole, letting the silence speak. When her phone rang, it was my text. "The locks have been changed. You're not welcome here. Please retrieve your things." I watched her face shift through confusion, then disbelief, then a flicker of panic as she realized the reality. Her hands shook slightly on the handle, her voice rising in the hallway. "What do you mean?" I stayed quiet, calm, observing every micro-expression. The quick glance to my sister's house across the street, the hesitation, the sudden understanding. She left, not with a fight, not with a scene, just the slow, reluctant retreat down my front steps. And my sister, she called later, her tone careful, apologetic, trying to negotiate excuses. I listened, measured, letting her speak, knowing her words held no power anymore. The quiet control, the careful preparation, the patience, it all paid off. I didn't have to yell, I didn't have to chase. They had walked into a game they didn't understand, and I had already won. Words spread quietly, carried through whispers and casual mentions. Friends who had watched me absorb slights and disrespect for years now looked at me differently, some with surprise, some with admiration. My ex's social circle buzzed with rumors of her abrupt retreat. Her confidence fractured. My sister called twice, carefully balancing guilt and defensiveness, testing whether her influence still mattered. It didn't. The stakes had been higher than I let on at the time. This wasn't just about a couch or a hallway. It was about trust, boundaries, and the dignity of my own space. People who had assumed silence meant weakness now understood it could mean strategy, foresight, and resolve. My reputation shifted not because of spectacle, but because of the quiet, deliberate restoration of control. Self-worth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the calm assurance that your limits will be respected, that manipulations and betrayals will be met with measured consequences. The lesson was subtle but powerful. People may test you, underestimate you, or walk over you, but when you act with precision and patience, the fallout hits exactly where it should. Sometimes it's the quiet, unshakable kind that rewrites the rules without a single shout. The house felt different afterward, lighter, quieter, like the walls themselves recognized that order had been restored. I moved through each room with a sense of calm I hadn't realized I'd been missing. No one was testing me, no one was walking over my boundaries. For the first time in a long while, my own space felt fully mine. I thought about my sister, about my ex, and even about the versions of myself who had tolerated small betrayals, ignored subtle insults, or accepted inconvenience as normal. That person existed, but she was no longer who I was. I had learned the value of patience, the quiet power of strategy, and the satisfaction of earning respect, not through anger, but through control. Looking ahead, I knew I would be more vigilant, more discerning about who I allowed into my life. I would carry the lesson like a shield, trust carefully, enforce boundaries firmly, and never assume silence is weakness. And in the end, it wasn't revenge that satisfied me. It was the reclaiming of my dignity, my space, and my sense of self. I didn't need to raise my voice to make them understand. Sometimes, the most powerful statement is the one you never have to speak.